Hi, welcome to Tonnau Talks. My name is Dr. Caris John. I'm a senior specialist educational psychologist working in Neath Port Talbot Local Authority. And I have with me today Caitlin Davis, who is an assistant educational psychologist. Today's Tonnau Talks is getting my kids to school. These are weekly sessions that we provide, and we talk about different subjects related to educational psychology. As you can see, there's a QR code on the screen. Please feel free to scan this QR code to gain access to our live sessions, because this recording is done with parents and carers from the local authority who are able to ask us questions throughout the session. So we'll be answering these questions at the end. So please stay tuned for that. So we will make a start with getting my kid to school. Okay. So today I have with me Caitlin Davis. Now, Caitlin Davis is an assistant educational psychologist specialising in what we call EBSA. So EBSA is emotionally based school avoidance. Caitlin, I'm wondering why some children might find it difficult to attend school.
Absolutely, Kaz. I think this is a question that many parents and carers are facing at the moment about why their child might be finding it difficult to attend school. There's a lot of conversations happening in education and health and wider services around, what's happening with our young people at the moment. So there's a little quote on the screen that was put forward by West Sussex Educational Psychology Service around what EBSA is and how we might define it. We've traditionally thought of children finding it difficult to attend school as perhaps we've associated with terms perhaps such as truancy, etc. But we're now starting to understand that when children find it difficult to attend school, that they may be facing this emotionally based school avoidance. And there's two elements of this. So we've got the emotionally based, which refers to kind of the emotional reasons why the child is finding it difficult to attend school, which that there are multiple of these. And the second half, school avoidance, refers to the behaviour that's the result of these emotions. So they're actually not attending school, they're avoiding school. And it's important to note this avoidance can take many forms, including complete non-attendance, where a child perhaps hasn't been to school for 6 months, a year, in some cases, I think 6, 7 years for some pupils, which is a lengthy period of time, or partial non-attendance. Perhaps it's quite sporadic, it's a couple of days here or there, or perhaps certain times a day or specific lessons. We'll talk more about this going forward.
Okay, so what you're saying there then, Caitlin, is that their refusal to attend school is based on an emotional response. So it's not that they just want a day off or they can't be bothered or they're just, feeling like it. It is actually something going on there emotionally is quite strong that is stopping them from attending school. And you were saying there then, it can be, for in very serious cases can be for a significant amount of time. So I'm just wondering, how would we start to see the signs of EBSA before it gets to that point?
Absolutely. So I just want to pick up on something you said first about there being kind of there's been an emotional response and not being a child choosing not to attend school. But those are very different things.
Yeah.
We have children who choose not to attend school for a plethora of reasons. Just don't want to be there. But then separate from that, we do have this, this experience of emotionally based school avoidance, which is very much not a choice, and it's the child is, finding school a very difficult experience for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
But the way in which a child starts to present with signs of EBSA can be very different. Even though it does happen, it's quite rare for a child to just kind of overnight go to complete non-attendance. It's often more of a gradual process, whether perhaps we've noticed that process up until then. Sometimes it appears like it's complete, but that process has been started long before that. But it begins with perhaps an occasional reluctance to go to school, and that's, you know, often we hear a lot of negative thoughts here around not liking school, not wanting to be there, you know, perhaps they drag their feet a little bit in the morning, and we see those occasional absences, you know, perhaps they stand to say, you know, they've got a bad stomach or a bad head. And we know our children well, so sometimes we know that's not quite it, but we're not sure what else is happening. From there, then, you know, as they're perhaps not attending school as much as they should be, we start to see that kind of occasional reluctance and occasional absence turn into more kind of concrete reluctance and an increased kind of sporadic absences. So, you know, there's quite a negative view of school here, and perhaps their ability to cope with school. And that's something that, you know, is dominant in a lot of conversations around school when you ask what their experiences. And that kind of occasional absence is developing to an increased sporadic absences. And with some pupils here, we start to kind of see notable patterns of absences, you know, that pertaining usually to what they're finding difficult with school, but not always. And then finally, then this kind of increased absence, increased reluctance, we see develop into that prolonged non-attendance. So this could be, you know, a number of days, a number of weeks, before we see this kind of complete non-attendance. It isn't always as linear as this. You know, children can move between these stages of development of their attendance and their reluctance. You know, but generally it is that, like I said, that gradual kind of development of both the negative, the emotional aspect of it, negative feelings and thoughts about school, and then the corresponding absences to go along with that.
So what you're saying is when we start to notice it is when we start to hear our children or see our children showing that reluctance to go to school. So they may go to school that day, but actually what you noticed in the morning is that they don't want to go. They're telling you they don't want to go. They're dragging their feet, but they still go. They may even complain about it the night before, going, I don't want to go. They might complain of having a sore tummy, but that reluctance is there. That's starting to show. And then you were saying then it's then the refusal, the absences start to increase. Okay.
Absolutely,
so that's when we start to see that EBSA showing. So I'm just wondering then, Caitlin, what causes EBSA?
So there's there's four main causes that the literature has suggested when they've kind of looked at cases, and this is Caney and Silverman's study in 1990, and they suggest these four main causes. Number one being that the child is seeking to avoid uncomfortable feelings that they have when they attend school. So this kind of might be worried feelings, it may be a little bit of low mood, it may be quite stressful feelings, but they want to avoid those because they're unpleasant, and it's a very natural response. We have to remember, you know, according to children's development, they may not actually realise what these unpleasant feelings are, so they can be very scary. The second one is to avoid situations that might be stressful, such as academic demands, social pressures, and or aspects of the school environment. You know, some children might find it very loud, very overwhelming. They may be at transition points in their educational career. Perhaps they're going into their GCSEs, or perhaps they're even going into a new school, you know, and this can be very, very stressful, and, you know, they can seek to avoid the situation and mostly the feeling. Number three is to reduce separation or to gain attention from loved ones. Unfortunately, we've been through quite a significant event with COVID. This is something we're largely seeing coming out of that, where young people have spent a lot of time with their loved ones and had a lot of kind of quality time with them and had a lot of lovely experiences. And as a result of that, they're finding that separation quite difficult. And then finally, we've got to pursue kind of pleasurable experiences outside of school, such as playing computer games or going shopping during school time. Now, I must note that number four on its own wouldn't really indicate EBSA, because that would indicate a choice. They're choosing the pleasurable activities. When we see that in combination with the others, you know, it may be suggestive of EBSA, but rarely on its own. So I just wanted to note that.
Okay, so the causes of EBSA, then you're saying there's four main causes,
Mm.
and you're saying to avoid uncomfortable feelings, such as feelings of anxiety and low mood, to avoid situations that are stressful, like the demands of school and maybe the social kind of
Mm.
experiences within school as well. You mentioned about separation anxiety as well, not wanting to leave family members at home. And then what I'm hearing there is a lot of the word anxious and anxiety.
Mm.
Now, just to be clear, anxiety is a diagnosable condition, a very serious one as well. And I know that we use the word anxiety a lot in society today, especially on social media. So our children are using it too. In terms of EBSA, we are talking about those feelings of anxiety, those anxious feelings. And we know with feelings of anxiety and those anxious feelings, it can be really difficult to understand and manage, And I'm just wondering, what can we help our parents to how to understand that kind of anxious cycle related to EBSA?
So that's a great point, Caris. The anxious cycle is very much something that underpins the experience of emotionally based school avoidance. Because essentially we have those negative thoughts that a young person is starting to think about school or themselves in school, and those are linked to those kind of anxious feelings. They start to feel those unpleasant feelings because of these negative thoughts and these perceived experiences that they're having. And then what happens is when an individual feels unpleasant feelings, they try to avoid that. They try to get relief from it because we don't enjoy feeling that way. So we avoid the situation and we have that sense of relief from that anxious feeling, but that relief is only temporary. And when we kind of move on to face other experiences, actually our avoidance and our anxiety becomes much worse because we can't hide from those feelings. And the fact that we've had that sense of relief because we've avoided, it makes our want to avoid things much stronger because we're essentially seeking that relief from that feeling. And then that's what kind of makes it more and more difficult to attend school, or makes the anxious feelings they have more bigger and bigger about school, because they are seeking to avoid it, and they're not actually addressing what's causing those. And that's the cycle. It's really important for us to understand when we're talking about emotionally based school avoidance and we're talking about getting our kid back into school, because unfortunately, the longer they're out of school, the more difficult it can be to get them back into school. It's really important when we identify the child at risk of experiencing EBSA that we get them help as early as possible, because avoidance behaviours, like we've said, can become fixed if not addressed early, and it can be difficult to intervene when a child has been out of school for some time. And there can be a temptation for parents and carers, because we love our children and we don't like to see them feeling unpleasant feelings, to remove the child to provide that emotional relief. However, just to point out that relief is only short term. And actually, by doing so, by removing them to give them that relief, we can actually make it more difficult for them to return in the long run.
Okay, so there's a lot there going that's involved with this anxious cycle. So when we're thinking about, the causes of EBSA, we mentioned about those uncomfortable feelings, avoiding situations. Um, Actually, this anxious cycle is really unhelpful, isn't it? We're thinking about, actually, I feel uncomfortable about school. I don't like the feelings of stress when I think about school, so I'm going to avoid it. Okay, and we all know that avoidance is the cure for anxiety, but in the most unhelpful possible way, isn't it? Because what that ends up doing is, like you said, there's a short-term gain. I feel a little bit of relief now because I'm not going to school today. But actually, the feelings of anxiety then grow even bigger into this monster in a way. We call it the
Mm.
anxiety monster, don't we? Because it creeps up on us, gets bigger and bigger, because the more we avoid it, the bigger it gets. And unfortunately for our children, that makes it even more difficult for them to then make that step to go back to school. I'm just wondering, Caitlin, um, I'm wondering what in particular makes it difficult for a child to attend school.
So there's a number of factors factors that can make school a difficult place for a child or young person, and can make them kind of have these, anxious feelings and negative thoughts. It can be age is one factor, especially when we're thinking about transition ages. You got your year sixes and your year 11s and your year nines to a certain extent, where they are transitioning to either a completely new part of their education, or they're moving into perhaps a more stressful part of their education. Mental health and well-being concerns, we did note that the anxiety we're talking about in today's session is not, kind of that clinical diagnosable level. However, for some young people, it can be, and that kind of in itself can feed into their avoidance of school and not attending school. School stress, exam periods, just general school stress of perhaps it's a busier time of year. Bullying, additional learning needs. So, for people, perhaps there's a strong link between EBSA and autism, for example. So it can be really difficult if you have additional learning needs, and perhaps the school environment um, isn't kind of conducive to those needs. But then also within that, it doesn't have to be to the level of additional learning needs. Some young people and children, they have academic difficulties, and not to the extent of it, kind of it being those additional learning needs, but can still make actually the schoolwork and the school experience really difficult. Physical illness, both in terms of if a pupil has been off for a significant period of time for a physical illness, it can be difficult to come back. But also if a pupil has a medical or a health need that can make school, quite difficult for them. If a child's experiencing adverse child experiences or trauma, that can make school quite difficult. Loss and bereavement. And particularly we see if perhaps the child's been notified of that loss or that bereavement within school, because then they start to associate those feelings of grief with the school environment. Separation anxiety, the school environment itself, that can be, that's one I know I hear a lot in my practice, as schools are getting bigger, a lot more pupils, there's a lot more noise, a lot more space. It can be, there's parts of the school day that can be very, very crowded and very kind of busy and very overwhelming. And then finally, we kind of have, peer or staff difficulties. Perhaps they don't feel like they have a supportive network in school. Perhaps they don't feel like they're close to any teachers. Or perhaps, socially, they're finding navigating the social environment of school very, very challenging, and they feel quite withdrawn.
Wow, Caitlin. So there's quite a lot of different reasons why a child might find it difficult to attend school. And you mentioned it, like age, school stress, bullying, physical illness, loss and bereavement, even the school environment. There's a lot there for us to consider when we're thinking, in terms of us as parents, when we start to notice that the child is starting to be reluctant to go to school. Remember, we talked about that reluctance before the school absences start. There's lots of things here that could be going on for our child, which attributes to them not attending school. Is it all of these factors that a child would experience if they had EBSA?
So, like with anything, that each child and the factors that are feeding into, them finding it difficult to attend school is going to be very different. Each child is unique and their experience of school is unique. So I wouldn't necessarily, not in the sense of it's a tick box and a child has to have all these to be experiencing EBSA. It can be, different combinations, or it might be one or two. And there's going to be experiences that contribute to that school avoidance that I haven't even listed in our session today. It is heavily dependent on the young person, on their feelings and their experiences, and what they feel is making school difficult for them. And we refer to these factors as pull factors. So anything that's making school difficult for the child and is pulling them towards staying at home, we refer to as pull factors.
Oh, okay. So when we start noticing that our child is reluctant to attend school and starting to show absences, we need to be mindful of these pull factors. So But what happens if we don't do anything about these pull factors?
So that kind of introduces further difficulties, perhaps if we've noticed that the reluctance is coming through and those absences are starting to kind of add up. What it can do is actually introduce further factors that actually support the pull factors and make the child's difficult feelings around school worse. And we call these maintenance factors. So these are the things that come out of the avoidance that's happened, or the behaviours that might be associated with, finding school difficult, perhaps avoiding certain lessons or not engaging as much because of those worried feelings. And what this does is it adds to the worry. And this might be things like falling behind on schoolwork. I hear this a lot in my practice, avoiding school gives them that relief, but then there's that additional anxiety of, oh my goodness, when I go back, I haven't done my maths homework for 5 weeks, or I haven't, I missed a whole topic in English. It could be very, very stressful. It could be things like losing friendships due to socially withdrawing. We see this a lot with our children, if they're finding that their friendships, or they're not spending enough time with their friends, losing a sense of belonging in school, perhaps due to being out of school, their routine is not, perhaps they're having sleep difficulties. There can be a number of things. But ultimately, these factors kind of add up in addition to the pull factors and just make that kind of pull towards home just that a little bit stronger and make it a little bit more difficult for that child to actually return to school.
Okay, so there's lots of issues here then. So not only that reluctance to attend school and then to actually go to school, we're talking about these different factors, these pull factors, pulling them to stay at home, can then also be exacerbated even more by them not going to school, because actually they miss their friends, they feel a bit left out, they feel like they're behind on their work and that they can't keep up, and then missing out on school trips and things like that. These are all really important things to think about. So gosh, so as soon as that we start to notice these pull factors and that reluctance to attend school, we need to be mindful actually keeping them home from school, having that avoidance and allowing that avoidance to happen actually makes things worse, Caitlin. So when I said what happens if we don't do anything, it'll actually make things worse, is what you're saying, because we'll have these maintenance factors which will actually make it even worse. So, well, as I said, like before, that anxiety monster grows, and that's what we're talking about here with these maintenance factors. So I'm wondering then, what would be then the push factors pushing them to go to school?
So we don't want it to be all kind of doom and gloom and talking about these pull and these maintenance
Yeah.
factors, because the reality is that these young people often have what we call push factors, which these are things that kind of push the child away from home and towards school. It supports them in attending school. It makes attending school that a little bit easier for them. And whilst children may be reluctant in kind of perhaps noticing these or recognizing them initially, with a bit of conversation, which we'll talk about further on, we can often find out what these are. So these can be things like positive experiences, what things they enjoy in school, what's their favorite lesson, having friendships at school, having support at school and at home. That's really important for our young people, is feeling that there's a sense of collaboration between themselves, home and school, and that it's a very supportive collaboration. Being in a school routine is really, really helpful. Um, Developing coping skills, thinking about that resilience that we talked about in our last session, having aspirations, motivations, and ambitions. What do they want to do when they grow up, and how are we going to get them there, or even just a goal, what they want to do by the end of the year. A strong partnership between homeschool and child, like we just noted, and key adults and safe spaces within school. So when they do feel overwhelmed or those worried feelings or those anxious feelings, they have somebody they can go to talk about with it, or who can help them, and they have a place they can go to where they can rest a little bit and recuperate from those overwhelmed feelings.
Okay, so there's lots of things there then that we can see as the push factors, the things that are helping them to go to school. So how does it work between these pull and push factors? When does it become a problem? What's the relationship between these here?
So I like to think of the relationship between pull and push factors as being a little bit like a seesaw.
Okay.
So if a child is experiencing too many pull factors, it tips in the favour of home, and the child finds school more challenging and worry inducing. However, if their push factors outweigh their pull factors, attending school is less worrying and are likely to have more positive experiences. Furthermore, if there's an equal amount of push and pull, it can result in perhaps a stalemate between the two, where perhaps a child may appear fine in school but still avoid attending. Or they, perhaps in those initial early stages where it's that occasional absences. Children who find it difficult to attend school have differences in their balance between push and pull factors, and a main consideration for their support is switching the balance so that the push factors outweigh the pull. For some pupils, we're never going to be able to take away those pull factors. We can put in place support for them, but we may not be able to eradicate them completely. So what we want to do is focus on where we do have control in that situation and increase those push factors, importantly with the collaboration of the child, because ultimately they are their push factors, and it's important that we understand their perspective on and actually what's going to be helpful for them.
Yeah, I mean, I can see there, Caitlin, a lot of what you're talking about relates back to some of our previous Tonnau Talks. So when we're thinking about the push factors, the things that are pushing us to go to school, those children to go to school, we can be thinking there in terms of that growth mindset that we talk in, in Confident Kids. It's about having that ability to see the positives as well and being able to see that, okay, yeah, I'm finding it difficult currently, but I can get better, and seeing that positivity. Whereas when we're thinking about those pull factors, it's about that resilience that we talked about last week. It's about how that they can be able to overcome these adversities that you mentioned here, because unfortunately, like you said, a lot of these pull factors are out of our control. And unfortunately, with life, we do experience a lot of pull factors, but it's about our ability to overcome them. And that's our resilience. So if you want to find out a little bit more about confidence and that growth mindset related to push factors and the resilience that is related to our pull factors, please look back on our YouTube page for those individual sessions, because they'll be really helpful in understanding these different parts.
Definitely, that's why we provide these sessions, and we've set up Tonnau Talks is so that we can build that knowledge and build those skills, so we can help our young people and our children with a number of things they may be facing in their development and in their life. So the strategies that we are going to talk about going forward will hopefully help you to navigate the balance between pull and push factors, and hopefully tip the balance with your support at home. Cass, would you mind telling us about a strategy that will support our children who are finding it difficult to attend school?
Absolutely. So one of the things that is always mentioned in our Tonnau Talks is how we talk to our children. And again, it's something that if you want to listen back to in our previous sessions, we've got Talking to Teens. That's really helpful in terms of this session and can be applied to our younger children. And again, when we're thinking about understanding the behaviours of our younger children, please also look back to understanding your child, because that goes through all the different types of developmental milestones for our children and our teenagers. But I always say, talk to your child. We need to be having those conversations when we're thinking back to, when you start to notice this reluctance to attend school. So again, that is that they're going to school, but they're starting to show that reluctance. You need to start these conversations. You need to start having chats with your child and recognizing the reluctance. Don't avoid it like they do. Talk about it. And it might be uncomfortable, and likely so when it comes to reluctance to attend school, because ultimately again, we're talking about anxious feelings when it comes to EBSA. And again, when we have these anxious feelings, the easiest way for us is to avoid it. So it's even avoiding talking about it. So your child might be very reluctant to talk to you about this, but we need to do it in a way where a child's feelings are validated. So we're not talking about your behavior, we're talking about the feelings and the thoughts that are driving that behavior. Okay, you need to talk to them about what are they worried about and what are their concerns. Now, one thing I will note, Caitlin, there's a lot of children don't always know. So even though they've got this big feeling and they desperately don't want to attend school, sometimes they don't have the words to tell you exactly why. That's where we need to look back to our hot cross bun, Caitlin, that you mentioned in understanding your child, is trying to link back through. So we know the behaviour is not your refusal to attend school. What we need to then look at, okay, what feelings are driving that? Now, often, like we mentioned, it will be feelings of anxiety, those worried feelings. Okay, what is driving those worried feelings? To go back a step now, what are those thoughts? What's your child thinking? So when you mention school, your child will ultimately, if they're experiencing an upset, they will feel sick, they'll feel their heart racing, they may have a sore head, okay, they may feel tired. We need to then be considering what are their thoughts, what's going on in their mind. And then you might need to help them to visualize it. You might need to go, right, imagine now we're stepping outside of school, what's the thoughts going through your mind, what are you thinking about? Okay, what about when you walk into through the main doors? What are you thinking about then? What about when you walk into the classroom? What about when you see your teacher? What are your thoughts then? Is to help them to start to put the missing links together, because ultimately what they've got is this big old horrible feeling in their stomach, and they're trying to avoid that. So ultimately, they're blocking out those thoughts. So again, we need to help them to really try and identify where these push factors are coming from, sorry, these pull factors are coming from, that make them want to stay at home.
So yeah, it sounds as if, having that conversation with worries, concerns is really, really important for
Yeah,
understanding what is happening, where's that reluctance coming from? What's driving that need to not go to school, to avoid going to school for whatever reason. But once we've understood then our child's worries, Cass, I'm wondering where would we go from here in terms of having a conversation?
well, the first thing I'd be doing is validating,
Mm.
because the minute we start to try and diminish, so when we diminish, we're going, oh, it's not that big a deal. Ultimately, as parents, what we're trying to do is make our child feel better, and we can't help ourselves. But when we say things like, oh, it's not that big, don't worry, then it, we're trying to diminish their feelings, and actually that makes our child feel you know further away from you in terms of you understanding them. So what you need to do is validate. Now, reassuring, again, that is not helpful either. So diminishing, so making them seem smaller than they are, reassuring too soon, because actually we've not unpicked really how in depth these worries are. Also, punishing, and it's not something that we do kind of consciously in a way, but sometimes we'll say, oh, don't be silly, don't, that's silly to think like that, don't feel that way about your teacher, or don't think about that yourself like that, that's not very nice. And even though what you're trying to do is make them feel better about themselves, you're kind of punishing them for having those negative feelings about themselves or their school or their teacher. So that's one thing we need to do, is validate. So it's about validating the feeling, not the behavior. Okay, so it'd be like, I can understand why you feel so worried, or I can understand why you think your teacher doesn't like you, because you've got these feelings. It automatically helps our child to think, okay, my parent understands me. Okay. Then what we need to do is talk about the alternatives, talk about the problem solving. Okay. Be like, okay, I'm wondering what your teacher would think if they heard that you thought they didn't like you, or that they didn't want you in their class. I'm wondering what that would look like. Or I'm wondering would it feel like just stepping outside of your school and getting to that point where you can actually start to feel it? And it's all about talking. We're not doing anything. This is all stuff that you can do at home. It's all about that visualization. Okay, because we're talking about, okay, I'm wondering then the next time that you're walking through the corridor, what you could do. I'm wondering if there's something you could do differently to last time to avoid A, B, and C happening. So that's the thing. Once you find out their worries and concerns, that's when you can help them to cope. And it's about asking them what would make them feel just that little bit better. Okay. Because we're never going to eradicate these feelings overnight through a conversation. What we need to do is allow our children that time to be able to be listened to help them to find out why they're worried, why they're concerned, and then to discuss helpful ways that is in their control, things that they can do that can make them feel just that little bit better. Because ultimately, we have to recognize and we have to be very firm with our children is that they do have to go to school. Okay, what we're trying to do here is build on their resilience. Okay, and this is the only way we can do that is by identifying, recognizing a difficult time and building on, okay, well, what can we do next time? You can't be part of that avoidance and that anxious cycle because you are then enabling your child to stay in that negative trap. What you need to do is challenge these negative thoughts, okay, and help them to see the light. That little glimmer of hope is what we need them to be able to see before they're able to start to make those next steps. And through seeing those glimmers, is that what we're focusing on here is those positive experiences. One thing I'll say about the positive experiences is that our memories are sat very closely in our brain. Our memory bank is sat very closely to our emotional store. So this is quite helpful. It can be very unhelpful, as I always mention. But when we start to ask a child to think about a memory and recall a memory that was positive, it will actually start to affect their emotional brain. And that emotional brain will start to feel those positive feelings that they had in that memory. So that's one thing that can be really helpful is that focusing on those positive things, because it really will affect your brain and then what you're currently feeling. So it's quite a powerful technique. Now, focusing on the negative past experiences will always bring up negative feelings. Now, that's something that we call rumination, and that's something that feeds anxious feelings and feelings of low mood. Is a child who focuses on negative experiences will always feel those negative emotions related to them. So the body is constantly having those horrible feelings. They're not feeling the dopamine and the oxytocin that they feel through having those positive interactions and positive feelings. They're actually feeling, levels of cortisol, which is very damaging for our bodies, to have them as prolonged periods of time. So it's really important when you're talking to your child, ask them about their worries, really unpick where they're coming from, what they could look like. Talk about little areas in their life where they've got control, where they can make changes to make it a positive step, and help them to reflect back on times where they felt positive in school and happy.
My goodness, Cara's conversation, it sounds so powerful with this, it can really
Yeah.
help us to support our child and to help them to support themselves. I think from that description of the power of conversation, we can definitely say that conversation and talking to our children is a frontline response in regarding emotionally based school avoidance. So I'm wondering then, beyond this, what else can parents and carers do to support their child who's finding it difficult to attend school?
Yeah, so I have mentioned this before. It's important that parents keep their child in a routine and have boundaries within the home regarding school. Like I said, you do have to attend school.
Mm.
And I'd be saying this in a supportive way. You do have to attend school, and I'm going to help you to make that easier for you. Okay. So it's about enabling them to feel like they're being supported, but it's having those firm boundaries in there as well. Because otherwise, like we say, we end up having those pull factors to stay at home. Okay. And then what happens is those maintenance factors kick in, which makes it even bigger. So the battle that you will have with this anxiety monster is going to be far more difficult for you. So hence why it's really important that we keep those boundaries within home about school, and that you're very consistent. And I know it, being a parent myself, we all have good days and tough days ourselves as parents, and sometimes it can be difficult for us to remain consistent, but we really need to try, especially when it comes to attending school, because by allowing our children to stay home, we're actually affecting them, with in terms of their resilience. They're not going to become resilient adults. And we want the best for our children. And we as parents, it's our job to create an environment and learning opportunities for them to be able to grow into successful and happy and healthy adults.
I'm wondering then, what can parents and carers do during the day to keep the routine and the boundaries regarding school?
Okay, so for example, your child has not gone to school that day. I think what's really important to note here is that you still maintain that routine. Like I said, those boundaries are still there. So it would be, you still got to get up. You still need to get out of bed. You still need to get dressed. You still need to brush your teeth, have breakfast. It's really important our children are in a routine. Again, when we're thinking about our circadian rhythm, so that is our body clock. It's so important that that is maintained. For anyone who's experienced jet lag, oh my gosh, does it affect you? If you haven't had a good night's sleep the night before, or even some people who have a kip during the day, it can really affect the way you feel, and in a negative way often. So it's really important that we keep that rhythm, that body clock going, as normal as possible. So we needed to be really mindful about sleep. So that includes going to bed at a good time and a decent time. Again, that includes reducing the access to iPads, televisions, anything that's got a blue light. That includes lighting as well. So what we need to do is make sure that our children have a routine at night so that they can be able to engage in that healthy sleep hygiene, so to be able to start to drift off to sleep naturally. Again, so when you've got your child at home, you get them up in the morning, have their breakfast, get it ready, get them to do some work. What we don't want is our children at home all day playing on their Xboxes, or going to see their nan and going shopping with their nan, for example, because these are all factors that will only support them in avoiding school. In a way, what we want to do is make home as boring as possible. Okay, so that it kind of makes school seem a little bit better, and what we want to do is make sure that they are prepared for school. So by giving them some work, it avoids that maintenance factor that you mentioned about feeling behind. So, there's lots of things that you can do online that helps them with their online learning, so that you can still engage in those tasks. But I'd certainly have a school day, as I say, from 9 till 3, because it helps that routine.
Absolutely. It's not necessarily about, kind of keeping that school routine or limiting those pleasurable activities throughout the day. It's about maintaining it that 9 till 3, when they would be in school. And when we think about keeping that school routine, it for our children who are kind of naturally seeking those pleasurable activities, it's helpful for them because it reduces that pull factor. But then when we think about our children who perhaps are finding it difficult to even get out of bed during the day, it helps them to actually, kind of implement those things that are going to make them feel better, having that, getting ready, having a shower, having a wash, having breakfast, having food in their stomach, being able to find a little bit of purpose in the day. So, it benefits a range of presentations of children who are facing emotionally based school avoidance. So I just want to pick up on something you did mention, Karen. You mentioned the word prepare, and I'm just wondering, thinking about when children are returning to school, how can we actually prepare them for that?
Okay, so we've kept the routine going, even though they've been at home. They've had those the sleep routine, as we talked about, and we've limited their pleasurable activities. We are now wanting to prepare our child for school, so that's really important, because what we can't expect is like, right, okay, on Monday you are going back to school. You've got to a point where, as a parent, sometimes it can be very frustrating. You feel like you've been really supportive and you've been understanding of their needs, but actually now, no, school is starting to phone home. It's starting to become a problem. Right, you're going back to school. That, unfortunately, isn't very helpful for our children. So what we need to do is prepare them in the best possible way. So if they have had prolonged periods of time away from school, remember that anxiety monster has only grown because you've been avoiding it. So the preparation is key here. And what we call it is like very gradual exposure to school. So again, when I said about talking earlier, we are talking about school. We're going to imagine school, start visualizing school. We're going to talk about what our class looks like. It's all those conversations that we have that can really help us to be able to prepare our child for school. When we've done the talking, we need to be getting the school uniform out, trying it on, putting it on in the morning, coming down to school, for breakfast in the morning, wearing your school uniform. It might sound silly, but it's all start that preparation. Then it would be getting in the car, driving to school, not getting out. Some of our children, the EBSA has become so extreme that actually they couldn't face getting out of school. But actually, we want to do it step by step. So when you think about those processes involved in just getting to school, those are the things you need to be maintaining, so that when you arrive at those school gates, that your child is able to sit in the car, keep calm, knowing that you're going to go home. The last thing you want to do then is have a hijack from the school saying, right, oh, come in, you're here now, you may as well go in. For a child, that breaks that trust. So that's one thing I really say with preparation, is to have an agreement that you stick to, and that you don't go off the course, because that will only make your child feel very untrustworthy, because ultimately they've agreed to go to school in their school uniform and sit at the gates in the car, but no more. And if someone is trying to then encourage them in, that'll only make them feel even more anxious, and also make them feel like people don't understand them. So it's really important that all these elements, like you said earlier, are made in agreed in collaboration with your child and school. Really, really important with that. Think about all these different things that you can do in order to prepare them for school. Is really, really important.
Yeah, picking up what you said there again, that preparation is, those when you kind of combine that school routine and that preparation, or implementing that morning of and night before plans to support the school routine. What are they going, taking away that uncertainty? What are they going to be doing? When are they going to be doing it? How are they going to get ready the night of? Are they going to put their uniform out? Are they going to have a nice tea, something they like? Because it's really important as well to make sure those self-care elements are on it as well, to build up their ability to be able to cope. What are they going to do that's nice, sorry, what's going to be, kind of, are they going to read their book for half an hour, that type of thing. Having a set bedtime is really, really important. So I know sometimes when in my practice I've had parents who are quite worried about, because with all the best intention in the world, we have these, we set these routines and we have these plans and stuff like that, and we put this preparation, but sometimes on a day a child may be finding it so difficult to go into school, and there's that concern around that lateness and that kind of not making it into school on an agreed time. What would you say there, Caris?
Are you thinking in terms of they haven't got up for the agreed time? It's been a struggle this morning, just getting, do you know what, we'll try again tomorrow. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in a sense of that as well, is if sometimes if it's just a bit of a slower morning, they're getting through their routine, and they're getting through their morning of plan, but because it's so difficult, they're just, it's a lengthy process.
I think what's really important here is that it's better late than never. Okay, when we think about the challenges of that routine in the morning, sometimes as much as we've done all of the other preparation bits before, that routine like we've talked about just now, And actually sometimes that battle can feel so overwhelming as a parent that you feel like you're constantly battling them. I think it's really, really important that you still continue. And I know I completely understand that sometimes you've got your own responsibilities. You've got to get to work, you've got to get other children to school, and I think we must still try where we can to eventually, however difficult that challenge may be, in that battle in a way that it feels like as a parent, is that you still get them to school, even if it's the last half an hour of the day. That is still success that needs to be celebrated, because what happens, and I know when we talk to our schools, they'll often say, "Oh, they're fine when they're here," and ultimately they are. It's that initial just getting them through the doors. That's where the big anxiety lies. And often, once our children are in school, it's not as big as and bad as they thought it was, or made that those anxiety feelings made them think it would be. And I think as parents, gosh, if we can still just get them there, and in that day, whatever time it may be, I always say better late than never.
I think that ties in really nicely to encouraging your child to engage with something they can do during the day.
Absolutely. And that's something to recognize, is that focusing on what your child's strengths, things that they're good at, what do they like, because that's really helpful in them feeling good about themselves. Because ultimately, when your child's feeling so anxious about school, when you talked about those factors that want to keep them at home, they're all very negative factors, Caitlin. And for a child to experience those and not have the resilience to be able to go, yeah, do you know what? That's tough. And it's not a nice feeling, but I can try again. If they don't have that brain process, that thought process that they can do it again, that's not, they don't have resilience. And not having resilience really affects their confidence, their self-esteem, their self-worth. So it's really important that we do encourage any progress that our children can make, because that's success, and that it can be built on. Us saying let's try again tomorrow isn't helpful, because again, that's us engaging with that anxiety monster of avoidance. We're then avoiding, and again, we've only made the situation feel more difficult for our children.
So I'm wondering about, Kaz, when we think about that initial point, where they're transitioning into school and they find it really, really difficult. And some children is, the kind of the anxiety monsters in the gate, they can't get past it. What about the children where the anxiety monsters in the front door because they're finding it really difficult to leave their loved ones?
Yeah. And that is something that we often see with our, nursery children, for example. So those children that haven't maybe gone to a crash or anything like that, and they're leaving their, significant adult for the first time, that you often see that at the gates, these nursery children, they're crying and they're really upset because, this is something that they don't like. Again, we see that in our older children, but not exactly the same, but it's still that anxiety and that separation worry of leaving their family member or leaving their home, So it's really, really important that we help our children to develop resilience. Okay. And again, I do point you back to our previous Tonnau Talks on resilience, because that talks about enabling our children to feel success from small gains, because those small gains need to be celebrated and recognized. That is something that they did do, and that they did cope with that separation worry. I think what's really important when we think about separation worry is having a routine. Okay, have an agreement, so that they know that, okay, I will be going in for 1 hour and you will be coming to pick me up. You're there on time. That is key. That is really, really important, that you are there at the time that they are expecting you to be there, and I think that's really important. There's other things that you can give your child, is something that they can keep in their bag that brings them comfort. So whether that's, maybe they can wear, a bracelet or something of yours, or, have a scarf of yours, whatever it may be, or their teddy that they like, that they can just keep in their bag. that will be really, really helpful. So I think these things that can really help with that separation worry is being consistent, always being there on time is really important. Having, a child knowing who they can go and talk to in school when they're feeling worried, because that's really important. Having that transition object, as I talked
Mm-hmm.
about, a scarf or whatever it may be. Sometimes we can put like a little like pen dot on our hand. So when we touch that dot, we're sending little messages of love to our kids. So, one thing I did with my child, I tied a piece of magical invisible string around her thumb, and then I tied the other end around my thumb. And I said, when I wiggle my thumb, the string will pull your thumb, and your thumb will wiggle too. And you'll know that I'm thinking about you and I'm saying, hey, how's it going? You know? And that's one thing I always asked. I said, oh, was your thumb wiggling in school? And she'd be like, yeah, it was. I was like, yeah, that was me sending you messages, and it's really helpful. I know it's all this magical thinking and only really works with the younger kids. I don't know if your teenagers will be up for that, but it can be really helpful. It's just to remind them that you are thinking about them and that there are people there that they can go to that can support them as well. It's important to have that key adult in school.
Absolutely. So, it sounds like there is a wealth of ways that we can keep our child in routine and have boundaries in the home that's ultimately going to support them to attend. And it's really important to note as well, guys, if there are any barriers to routine, for example, sleep or, kind of please seek support for that, speak to your GP and speak to school, and get some kind of professional advice on that so we can, remove that as a barrier.
Yeah, and that's something that's really important is talking to school here, isn't it? Caitlin, I'm wondering if there's things that you can pinpoint that's really helpful when you've been working with certain cases. What parents can do that can help that build that connection with school and that collaboration.
Absolutely, that partnership is so important between school and home, and with the child within that partnership as well as a key part. But there's some things that you guys can do as parents, to kind of contribute to that partnership, letting them know about what difficulties your child is facing, helping them to understand, keeping in contact with school regarding your child's absences, when they're going to be coming in, etc. I know it can be, you know maybe quite stressful and perhaps a little bit embarrassing, perhaps if you've agreed to come in at 9 and, like I said, it's a bit of a slow morning, you don't think you're going to get your child there until 11, 12, please let school know that, especially if you've got a plan in place, they can make adaptations so that when your child does come in, that plan's able to be executed. Suggest what support would be helpful, or if things are working in the home, share with school, it's all helpful information. Let school if you're having any difficulties as a family, and reach out for support, see what they can do, who they can refer to. Let your child know you are working with school, strengthen that partnership between the child and school, help them to find places they can seek support, a safe person, a safe space. For our young people, a lot of times uncertainty can really contribute to those worried feelings. So, be open and honest. You're having conversations with school, and this is what you're having conversations about. And actually, invite them to give their perspective, to give their opinion, because ultimately it's about them. Identify work with them to identify your child's likes and what changes that school could make to increase their push factors. And finally, working with your child and school to come up with a plan of support so that your child's able to manage their worried feelings and feel better about going to school. And I think that brings us on nicely to our final slide, which is talking about, actually what's our top tips to take away from this, Cara?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Caitlin highlighted there that, working with school is so important. They can really, really support you at home and support your child when they're in school,
Yeah.
and be able to enable them to feel better about attending school. So finally, our Tonnau top tips, okay? So first things first, talk to your child about their worries, remembering about the fact that they might not be able to tell you. So that's why we need to use our questions to be able to help unpick what's driving those behaviors, what feelings have they got, what could be driving those thoughts, help them to visualize the journey to school and what it feels like when they're in school, because that's when they'll be able to identify things that make them feel really worried. Okay, keep your child in a routine. It's really important. So if your child is refusing to attend school, please keep them in a routine, getting them up in the morning, having breakfast at the normal time. These are really, really important, and that sleep is essential for our developing brains. Um, as Caitlin's just mentioned there, keeping in contact with your child's school, this is essential because these are the people that will be able to support you the greatest and to be able to support your child when they're in school. So keep in contact with your child's school and encourage your child to face school even when they find it difficult. It's keeping those boundaries in. It is tough being a parent when you have to put these boundaries in, which you can see cause genuine upset to your child, but you need to do it. You need to maintain it because that will only develop their resilience, and that's essential for health and happiness in the future. And again, if you feel that your child's needs are above and beyond, please seek additional support, that could be affecting their attendance. So we are going to move on to our questions. Caitlin's going to check now which questions we've had.
Right, so we've got quite a. So a person's reached out and said, my child struggles at the start of each new term and also currently is at the end of year six and moving to comprehensive. If we do manage to get him into school and he spends much of the time out of class not engaged in the learning, sorry, this question has continued. They've had some help from school to find alternatives, but they are very worried that things will kind of worsen as they transition into comprehensive.
Okay, really, really good question there. So the parent has said that their child is in year six, so they're currently in primary school, and they will be transitioning to comp in September. And they've mentioned that their child is already experiencing difficulties with attending school, and they've done the right thing. They've already got in touch with school, so that's really important there. And I think what the question was asking is how can they make sure that in September their child will be able to attend their comp. Now, what would be really helpful here is to maintain that routine, okay? And I know it's really hard through the summer holidays. However, if we can start to maintain it essentially 2 weeks before, if you can, do that, that's really helpful. I would be taking drives to the school. I'd be going for walks around the school building and the school site to make that school feel a little bit more familiar. So in the summer holidays, if that's something you can do, that'd be really, really helpful. So going to the school and seeing the school site is really, really helpful. And again, if you can talk about the school to make it as part of your normal everyday conversations, you can keep learning as well. Because if your child has worries about learning, because you mentioned there that they're not doing a lot of learning in the classroom, so maybe that's something you can do is like engage in some sort of fun sort of learning activities throughout the summer holidays. That will be really helpful. Again, another thing I would say is a great thing is maintaining those social links with their friends, and those other children that are going to that school as well. So if you can arrange, times for them to play together, sleepovers, whatever it may be, so that you can maintain those social links is really, really important, I think.
Sorry to interrupt, guys. This parents also mentioned that the child is finding it really difficult to actually speak about what they kind of find it difficult, and kind of can hold their hands over their ears and become quite dysregulated and angry when they're asked about school.
Okay, so that this child feels some really big feelings, negative feelings about this. And so again, the putting the hands over the ears, that's avoidance. Okay. They don't want to talk about it. Now, unfortunately, when children experience a problem, a lot of us adults will say, well, what's wrong? Okay. So when they find it difficult or don't even know, again, those questions are very frustrating. So what they learn is ways to avoid even responding to those questions. Hence why he's putting his hands over his ears, because he doesn't want to go into that place where he thinks about it, because it brings up such negative feelings. So he's avoiding those feelings. What we need to do is validate. And this is the thing. What we need to do is start to ask and start to talk about at school, so that it starts to become more of a familiar conversation, because ultimately he's avoiding it because it brings up these difficult feelings. You need to validate. You need to say, I can see that you're finding this really tough. You're putting your hands over your ears because you don't want to talk about it. And I can understand that you must be feeling really, really worried and scared. Now, if you get those feelings wrong, I'm sure your child will be able to tell you, no, I'm not feeling that. I am feeling wherever it may be. But that is engaging in the conversation. So don't worry about getting it wrong, because it's still continuing that conversation. Now, if your child continues to put their hands over their ears and ignore you, they're not ready to start talking, but they might be ready to listen. Okay, so I know he's got his hands over his ears, but they can still hear. So this is where you can start to wonder out loud, and where you can start to show that empathy. So we start to talk about, I can understand that if you're this worried about school, that it's really tough to talk about it. And I know when I feel really worried about something, I don't want to talk about it either, and I want to avoid it. So I get why you're putting your hands over your ears. And I know that when I've got to face it, I find that really tough. But actually, I feel so much better after I've talked about it. And I'm wondering maybe if that's something we can do later when you're feeling able to. And I'm here whenever you're ready to talk, because we are going to have to talk about it, and it's going to be difficult. But I'm here, and we're going to do it together. So it's showing that support and understanding, but recognizing that actually right now isn't the time, but maybe later will be. But you're still here to talk about it. Because again, what we need to be mindful of is you can't communicate with a part of the brain that's not there. And when a child is completely dysregulated, their thinking and communication and problem solving part of the brain is disengaged, and they're being driven by fear and anger. So once they've come to a point where they're feeling more calm and able to communicate better, that's the moment where you need to have those conversations.
Thank you so much, Kaz, and thank you so much to our parent carer who sent in that question. Sounds as if you're having a real difficult time at the moment, and so is your child. But we hope that the responses we've given will be helpful for you in supporting your child. We just had another one, and I think this will be the final one for the session. So this parent is wondering what support and services are out there for families and young people who are finding it difficult to attend school.
Well, you're at the right place. So yeah, so part of the Tonnau services, we offer parent drop-in. So that's one thing that you'd be able to do. So again, for any parent that's asked a question today that we haven't been able to answer, please, you feel free to book in a slot with us direct. So you'll come meet us in person, where we can talk in more detail about your child's needs and their non-school attendance, and where we can support you in engaging with the school as well, to help for your child to attend school. So that's one thing that we do offer, which is called Tonnau Parent Drop-In.
I think on that note as well, like we talked about with being in contact with school, schools will have a wealth of support and services that they're aware of, that they can tap into, and they can support you to tap into, in terms of supporting your young person. So please, get in touch with schools, see what they can offer, or things that they can signpost you to, because they'll have a really good knowledge of that. This is something that is becoming, children finding difficult with school is something that we're seeing more and more of, and there's more and more support and services that are being created to support families and children with that. So
One thing I will mention is that social services, they offer some fantastic support for parents, with like parenting advice and guidance and support. You know, they're really fabulous. They do a lot of great work. But also one thing I will mention before we end on about support services, if you ever feel concerned about your child's well-being, please always seek support from a medical professional. So when our children are experiencing extremely difficult feelings of anxiety, they can need additional support from our mental health services. So that's really important to note before we end today's session. Okay, diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much for joining us today for our Tonnau Talks on getting my kid to school. I hope you found this session to be helpful. Please don't forget there's our QR code there on the screen for you to be able to get access to our live sessions and join us for future Tonnau Talks. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr.